for this session, we're going to be looking at science for parliamentary policy making. So over the next 75 minutes or so, we're going to explore how scientific knowledge and expertise can support legislators in their decision-making processes. We're going to be looking at what kind of mechanisms should be put in place to bring science into parliamentary policy making. And we'll also, hopefully, get time to address the unique challenges when it comes to providing scientific advice in a parliamentary setting. Again, we heard about some of those challenges earlier this morning. Now, I'm going to start by putting some opening questions to our panelists. Then I'll take your questions or brief comments, and of course we'll go to those of you watching us online as well. So let me introduce our guests now. Marcus Scheuren is the head of unit of the European Parliament's Panel for the Future of Science and Technology, known as STOA, isn't it? Anna Elorza is coordinator of the Office of Science and Technology of the Spanish Congress of Deputies. Racha Herfi is a member of the Parliamentary Scientific Services of the Chamber of Deputies in Luxembourg. And finally, Chris Tyler is the Director of Research and Policy at University College London's Department of Science, Technology and Engineering Public Policy. You're all very welcome. Marcus, I'm going to start off with you because you live in the heart of parliamentary policy making at the European Parliament. So, first of all, I suppose, do you think science is important to parliamentary policy making? And if so, why?
Thank you, Karen, and thank you for having me here. It's great to have this session on parliamentary science advisory because we've focused on the executive this morning, and in the end, it's the legislators who make the shot and take the final decision. So it's quite good that we discuss this right now. Well, yes, of course, I think it's relevant. Otherwise, I would feel useless. I think to establish trust in science is the basis for actually being able to debate in a democracy. One needs to agree on the facts, or at least have a common understanding of what is at stake, what are the facts, and then one may have different views on the conclusions, on the decisions to take. What we're doing in STOA, so as the advisory body to the European Parliament, we have as it's a panel on the future of science and technology. These are members from different parliamentary committees which have a science angle. So typically the Industry and Research Committee, Environment, Transport, Internal Market, and these members have a dedicated interest in following science and technology topics. And the idea is that we feed into the process ahead of when it comes to legislation. I mean, a classic example was the work that STOA did on AI, on artificial intelligence. I think we're the first body within the European Parliament addressing these topics and really preparing the debate. And in my previous function, I was heading the secretariat of the Special Committee on Artificial Intelligence in the European Parliament. And I realized how important and useful the work of STOA was to prepare the ground so that we could hit the ground running, so that people had a common understanding, at least those who wanted, what this is about, what are the stakes, what we're actually talking about.
And is it scientists who do that, or experts in their field who do that kind of work?
That is quite interesting. So we are part of the European Parliamentary Research Service, and yes, they're researchers. The title, they're really policy analysts. So what we're doing is what the French, I think they call it vulgarisation, which is not negative. It just means to translate actually what is in the evidence of science and technology to the needs of the legislator. I mean, the difference to advising the executive branch, Parliament is the voice of the people and represents the people. It's not an expert panel. So people have a very broad range of backgrounds, not necessarily scientific, not even academic maybe, and our role is actually to bring that information in a way that it is useful, that is targeted, and really fit for purpose then for the legislative work.
So you seek out the information, you bring it together, and then you present it to the various committees or whoever might be important to get this information.
Absolutely, absolutely. And then the difference also with the executive branches in the European Parliament, we have 705 individuals with very different political background, and so our role is also to have a fact-based, neutral approach, and then obviously the members are free to take the advice and take that up for their political work.
Okay, I might go around to all of you to see how it all works in your respective areas. So Anna, you're coordinator of the Office of Science and Technology of the Spanish Congress of Deputies, so you're dealing with Spanish politicians. How does it work for you in Spain?
Thank you for having me here, Karen, and thank you for the commission. It's really a pleasure to have the Spanish model a little bit here. It's for us really an honor. We, after several years, from a bottom-up initiative coming from the scientific community, decided finally to set up our office in a very, I would say, Spanish model. Like we were inspired by what Post in UK was doing, by STOA and other colleagues in the Netherlands, for instance. But finally, we really got our own model, which is adjusting to the Spanish Parliament. And what we are trying is to institutionalize, I always say that, collective intelligence. We face very sophisticated and complex problems, and we need to be more sophisticated institutions and more well-connected in networks. So we bring all the intelligence that we have, tackling all the scientific community in the different disciplines. We interview more than 30 people for each of our reports. So we talk to all of these experts coming from the different sectors, public sector sometimes, academics of course, and private sector, society, and try to bring and to contextualize all that information in a thorough way for the MPs.
Can you give us a sense of the kind of areas that you would be looking into and researching?
In our case, our topics will be chosen by the MPs themselves. The main political body in the national parliament, La Mesa, the board of the Congress, will be the one in charge to select those topics. And it can be, I mean, we did cancer therapies, we did cybersecurity, we did green hydrogen. I mean, it really changes depending on their interest. What is similar is the methodology. Each time we face a topic, we really try to bring this collective intelligence into place, and it takes us a few months to have these reports. But once we have the report finished, we go there, we meet with them, we bring the experts, 4 or 5 experts for the main or the most relevant in the sense that they're from different disciplines, for instance, and then we have these dialogues with them, trying to understand and to really get insights of the report together with them. And then, if I may say something, we also put in place some informal activities, and we did a petty scheme, scientists and MPs, and this works super well also, because it's a way of meeting them in a less formal setting. Yeah. And I think this was something that we copied from the Royal Society, in fact, doing that in the UK Parliament, but it worked very, very well in our case. Okay,
and I'll go back to you about what way then will your reports or expertise or information feed into legislation. But first, let's get a snapshot of all of the ways you work. Racha, you're working in Luxembourg. You're a member of the Parliamentary Scientific Services of the Chamber of Deputies. So how does it work from your perspective?
It's interesting to hear Anna presenting her research department, because our model is completely different. I am part of the staff, actually, of the parliamentary administration. My colleagues are as well. We are all researchers in our own fields, but we are also part of the staff of the parliament. So we call ourselves the Cellule Scientifique. The research department of the Chambre des Députés in Luxembourg was set up 2 years ago, so we are quite young. We are a team of 9 researchers covering different fields, so legal research, natural sciences, humanities, and social sciences. And we work on demand, so that's different. The main difference with what Anna introduced. We work on request of the MPs, but also on request of parliamentary instances, like parliamentary committees, but also the executive of the Chambre des députés, so the Conférence des Présidents. So we work for the administration, but also for the MPs directly. And also the time frame is not the same. Because we work directly on request, we can have research that require a week of research, which you understand is very, very little for a researcher. And sometimes it can take up to 6 months. So depending on the time frame we have, we also have different types of research documents that we produce.
And you say you're a researcher.
Yes.
Are you a scientist?
I'm a legal researcher.
You're a legal researcher. So if you're tasked with getting a report on something very scientific, I don't know, I mean, Anna talked about cancer, wasn't it? Do you reach out to the experts in their fields?
Yeah,
Anna mentioned talking to, was it 30?
So, as I said, we are a very small team. We're only 9. Okay, we have a small parliament also, 60 MPs. But still, it's a small team of 9 colleagues, and we don't cover all fields. We all have our specialities, but we don't cover all fields. And we reach out to the research community in Luxembourg, but also abroad. And that's actually one main part of our mission is to consolidate our network within the research community in Luxembourg and abroad. And we rely a lot, actually, on network communities such as EPTA, where we met our colleagues, and we rely also on these networks to improve our methods and way of working. Yeah.
Okay, very good. Let's move to you, Chris. Now, you're slightly different in that you're the Director of Research and Policy at University College London's Department of Science, Technology, Engineering and Public Policy. So tell us how you work in terms of feeding information into the UK Parliament, I presume.
Yeah, sure. So, I mean, I actually used to run the equivalent office that we've heard talked about here in the UK. I ran the Parliamentary Office of Science and Technology for 5 years. I won't go into detail on how they run things because it's actually somewhat similar. Like, I think from the outside, it would look pretty much identical to Luxembourg and Spain. It's an in-house office of experts providing advice. STOA is slightly different. It's got a kind of committee-based structure made up of politicians, which is similar to France. There are other models that are really valuable and set up for different political cultures. For example, in Austria, Norway, Denmark, they have outside bodies that are either have a funding relationship with Parliament or some kind of formal consultative role with Parliament, where similarly, it's an office of experts doing everything from kind of high-level expert advice through to participative explorations of science and technology issues. So there's a whole range of models for doing this, and the reason for that is because parliaments are really different. And I imagine some of the audience is from executives, and I think it's just worth pointing out how different parliaments are from executives, which is why the flavour of science advice looks so different. So in executives, you're usually working to a single political vision with a narrow range of policy options, with maybe one minister, one commissioner, one person in charge. In parliaments, you are working to usually hundreds of stakeholders who are very, very different in their values and political cultures. So everything from the right to the right to the left to the left. And as science advisors, you need to be useful to all of them. They all have equal priority to you. So the way you do science advice in that context is very different. And back to the original question you asked, which is why it matters, is that when you have that massive range of policy options in front of you, the correlation between something that looks politically nice to do and it being backed up by evidence is basically non-existent. So the job of the science advisors is trying to narrow those range of options down from a technical perspective, really, and try to, I think as a ballpark, this is not evidence-based at all. I love talking about evidence without actually having evidence to back up my point. I reckon if you could knock out the bottom 20% of really bad ideas as a science advisory body, you've done your job. And then you let the politicians figure out the top 80%. You
mean, okay, that they ask you for things that that's a waste of time, is it?
100%. Yeah, we once had an MP who asked us if we would be able to run a astrology forecast for the Parliament to see what the stars and the planets were going to say as to what was going to happen in that Parliament. So yes, you do get a fair amount of absolute nonsense that comes in, but that's part of the job, is to try and field that and narrow it out so that you're dealing with viable options and that you can explain what the underlying evidence base is, so that the work that's taking place in Parliament is somewhat more informed. And just finally, I will shut up in just a sec. The other bit where it's different is that the point of an executive, that kind of everything that you do leads towards a policy decision. And that's not the case in Parliament. 1/3 of the stuff that they're doing is legislation. So that's somewhat similar. But debate is an end goal in its own right. Like, that's an important function of a democratic organisation, the apex of the democratic system. That debate is really important. And the other aspect that's really important is scrutiny. It's the Parliament providing scrutiny of the executive, and that is a function in its own right, but not traditional policy making as executives would see it. So just want to park those ideas.
Okay, and presumably, I'm just thinking, in, say, for example, in the UK, you would have countless institutions, organisations, agencies who would say they're expert in this, that and the other. How would a parliamentary, and I'm very curious to get our three parliamentary experts here, how do you deal with that? You know, you're competing with other agencies who could claim they have more expertise than you might or your organisation might. Or is that actually a factor?
No, it doesn't come up too often, to be honest. There's quite a lot of collaboration. I mean, in government, there are bodies dedicated to providing science advice, and we are the sort of the counterpart in Parliament. And there can be a tension between the two because of that scrutiny function that we're helping politicians to deliver. But by and large, it's very collaborative. You know, the Chief Scientific Advisors Network, the Foresight Networks, all of those things, relationships with the agencies, is all extremely strong.
Okay, so Marcus, let's go back to you then, to the effectiveness of all the work you do. So Chris has very succinctly outlined the difference between providing expertise for an executive versus politicians, parliamentarians. How effective then is the work that you do in the European Parliament in terms of finally maybe enabling legislation or certainly influencing potentially the European Parliament into getting the Commission to produce a law on something or other?
Well, I guess as Chris said, I mean, legislation is part of the work, and then some of our work is really to inform the debate, which is already a good in itself to inform the debate and enable an informed exchange. On legislation, it really depends on the area. Again, as the earlier example of AI, where I think the work was very much informing the debate, which then led to legislative work. And it's difficult to measure, but I would hope that somehow the work we did feeds into the legislative work now on. I guess we need to find a measurement for that. But the other times, for example, in times of COVID, which was very much time for the executive because everybody was in crisis mode, where the parliaments were actually mainly nodding off what the executive was doing, which is normal in times of crisis, where the role of our office and was more to really inform what's the latest state of play in science, what's going on, but it would not necessarily feed into legislative work because it was very much crisis mode again. So it very much depends on the topic, really. And then, as Anna pointed, no, I think it was more Luxembourg, we are very much demand-driven. So some of our members have a very close view of what's coming up next, and some topics we're dealing with may not lead to immediate legislation, so it's more personal interest, which may then lead to an informed debate later on. So it's we're there to serve the interests of our members as well. And
of course, every parliament has political representation, well, in a democratic process from left to right. The European Parliament is no different. You've 705, isn't it, parliamentarians? 705, yeah. It is a very vast chamber. Do you come under any pressure to produce a certain outcome, given the kind of, you know, you could have the left groups in the Parliament wanting to drive opinion from the Parliament to legislation in a certain way, and the EPP might have a very different view. So how do you balance that and give a kind of an overview that takes into account the pressures that might be coming from them?
So first of all, this committee or panel is not a decision-making body. And so the studies, in the end, they are endorsed, they're not voted upon. And obviously the studies are, what we produce is trying to balance or to present what are the different views and then produce policy options. That's usually at the end of the process. I mean, sometimes we get really, I mean, not echoing some of the requests like that Chris were mentioning. We had a member who was asking we should come up with a study demonstrating the benefits of vaping. And said, well,
But of course, vaping did come up as a vote in Parliament, didn't it?
Yes, indeed. But I mean, we cannot come up with a study. We can assess the health effects of vaping, but not demonstrate the benefits.
The benefits,
of it.
yes.
So then we have to rephrase the question, and I think in the end we didn't do the study. But just to show, yes, sometimes they are biased. There were questions on vaccine technologies, mRNA, which came from members which were very anti-vaccine, let's put it that way. But in the end, our studies are most of the time done externally. They come from the science community, and again, they're presented to the panel and then endorsed. So it would typically not be a single member who would be in a position to oppose that. So yeah.
Okay, Anna, from your point of view, maybe take us through that process, how you deal with the politicians, how, you know, whether you come under those kinds of pressures or not.
To be honest, we didn't. I mean, we are very young and we are learning. So maybe they are, being kind with us for the moment. I don't know, but we didn't face those pressures. We are completely independent while doing our research and our reports. And then we go there as really honest brokers with different set of experts, and we open a dialogue with them. So we didn't face those pressures. But what I really feel it's important to say here, at least in our parliament, is that we are not only influencing the legislative process, but also the mindset of the MPs. And this is important because maybe UK or the European Parliament, they have been there for many years, but it's important to understand that we are all learning how to work in this different way. And this needs time and training and a lot of dialogue between us. I think that we really were happy to change a little bit the conception and the mindset and the culture within our parliament, that this office was necessary, that this is effectively changing the debate, the level of the debate. And for me, this is super important too, that we are really changing the way we are working together. So.
And do you have to water down some of your communication or the scientific aspects in your report in order to ensure it's comprehensible, it's accessible, because often scientific information can be very technical?
That is one of the most difficult parts, because we have these long interviews with scientists and they want to be super rigorous and use their acronyms and everything. And then we are there, the team of the office, we are 7 people fighting to remove those acronyms and to try to be accessible for the MPs. And this is part of the job. It's a new profession. And we are learning how to do it. I mean, it's not an interview in the press, it's not a scientific paper, this is another thing. And we need to understand that. We need to put on paper the dissensus, the consensus, maybe the gaps. And we need to explain all that, to contextualize the scientific knowledge that we have in this moment, in this very now moment. That may change in the future, that might not be sure 100%, and try to explain that in a comprehensive language. And this is very difficult. And sometimes the scientific community is reluctant, to accept that you talk about their disciplines in such a way. So, but what we do is we have a methodology where they can revise the text, the final text. So we will get their feedback from if we interview 30 people, they will come with their feedback. So at the end, we get to have a consensus document.
Yeah.
But they suffer We suffer and they suffer.
I can imagine. Maybe, Racha, you can take us through some of the sufferances that you go through, some of the challenges and then some of the good things in terms of
I was
those.
going to say that before talking about pressures, the main challenge for us is what Anna explained, is to create this culture of recoursing to scientific information, and we try to create actually the demand of this information. So we reach out a lot to the MPs and to their assistants as well to explain what our job is and how we can help them in understanding the draft bills that often come from the executive, how to scrutinize them better, how to elevate also the debate on certain information that usually the MPs struggle to identify and to understand, and even they struggle to identify where to find the right scientific information, especially in this area of post-truth. They now have this service at hand within the Parliament, and they usually are very relieved to have us and to discuss with us their questions. We spend a lot of time actually before being formally seized of their request. We spend time discussing with them their question and often rephrasing them into scientific terms, because they often come with often with a very oriented question, often a question that would fit better in their agenda. And our mission as being part of the parliamentary administration is to serve the public interest, actually, and not the interest of one party. So we try also to rephrase the question in terms, in more, I wouldn't say general terms, but more general interest terms that would serve all the parliament and would really elevate the debate and make the debate more informed.
And are they interested? Are politicians genuinely interested in digging down and getting the scientific facts?
Yes, they are interested, and they're very happy usually with the output. Sometimes the output doesn't fit exactly their agenda, and we get to discuss our research within parliamentary committees, sometimes at our request and not at the request of the MPs themselves. But for us, it's very important as well to be able to present the methodology, to present how we dealt with the topic to reach such conclusions. Okay. And as already said, what we do, we don't help them into making decisions. We just put forward the options that we have found scientifically.
Okay, we have a question coming in, which I'll get to in just a moment. But Chris, maybe go back to you, because Racha mentioned post-truth. And of course, and I know you were involved in an AI report. We might get to that a little bit further down. But how can we trust that the information that is being gathered through the different expert groups in the Parliament, in the various parliaments, including the European Parliament, is right, that it's untainted, that it's, you know, it's not created artificially, that it's something we can trust, and that politicians can trust it, obviously?
Well, I think if you look at all of the different ways of doing parliamentary science advice, I think we could all agree that that's the number one skill we all have to have, is being able to identify where evidence is value-laden, being able to unpick what we mean by consensus, being comfortable communicating uncertainty, those kinds of things. So that's almost the most important thing that parliamentary science advisors do. And just to sort of anecdotally, it's something that a lot of people working in science advice in, say, government agencies don't have to be quite that sense of like extreme political impartiality combined with determination to accurately represent consensus or lack thereof in the community. So
so they have to be doubly careful, you're saying?
Extremely careful. I mean, the landscape of parliamentary science advice is littered with roadkill. You know, the Office of Technology Assessment was shut down in 1995 because the office was deemed to be captured by the Democrat Party. The Danish Board of Technology got its funding axed because it sort of essentially lost contact with the connection with Parliament, and it got defunded. The first thing that happened to me when I arrived in post was that they tried to axe my budget. They were like, new young kid comes in, haha, we're going to smash that budget. And I successfully managed to argue against it because science and technology are critically important to every single bit of policy work that you do. And we were able to successfully make that argument. And in the end, we were the only bit that didn't get cut. He says boasting. But yeah, there's lots of examples. Italy crashed and burned. There've been, I mean, crikey, how many times did Spain try to get an office up and running before it finally came to be? It's not an easy thing to do, and it's because it's so political. The environment is so political. And you either have to come up with a mechanism whereby you have a very high level of political cover for what you're doing. So one way of doing that is having a panel of politicians. And in that context, you can basically do what you want. You can make a ton of recommendations. You can annoy other politicians because politicians can annoy politicians. And that's part of the fun. If you are, however, an in-house body like Spain, Luxembourg, UK, they don't make any recommendations, really. It's very much a case of this is the evidence, we place it in the policy context, and then we back off because you don't want to upset politicians. You would lose all of the value you add by being in and being able to do all that culture change stuff that my colleagues have so expertly explained is a large part of why they're there.
Okay, very good. We're getting questions in, and I'm going to take your questions as well here in the room. Juliana Angelova wants to know, how can scientists, researchers better engage with MEPs? How can the exchange between them be fruitful? Short, brief summaries of relevant research resources, ? There's a second question about the European elections, but maybe first, Marcus, you could answer that question then. How can you better engage with MEPs? That suggests you're not necessarily engaging in the best way possible, but anyway, I suppose improve the engagement. Scientists and researchers better engage with MEPs.
I guess colleagues may want to come in if it's not only MEPs but also MPs.
MPs,
so I think it's
yeah.
I guess the same. One thing I think is also to understand the other side, the needs of the other side. And by the way, it's not necessarily only the members of parliament, it's also their staff, because frankly, it's often those who will read the assistants, the policy advisors and so on. It's maybe a bit too optimistic to think that an MEP or an MP will read through a study of 100 pages or so, and that's unreasonably optimistic. And then also to see actually what is the MP, the MEP dealing with, what is coming up, what is relevant to them. We have often also in STOA, we are approached by scientists, hey, I have a fantastic study I want to present to MEPs. And first of all, we don't do that, we do our studies ourselves. And then we have to see, why would that be relevant? There's a lot of fantastic research out there, but it may not be relevant to the work of a legislator. Yes, I mean, by all means, short briefs, summaries, executive summaries, recommendations for actions, all of that, yes. And then there's also, I mean, there are different ways to engage. Like Spain, we're doing a pairing scheme between scientists and members. By the way, this afternoon our event is a kickoff of a short science pairing scheme. So where we will,
yes,
indeed.
Yeah.
Where we will bring together scientists with members of parliament. This time only for a short time because we realize our members have limited time available, in particular to the run-up to the European elections, which is the second question. Outreach with new members, well, yes, from the moment they are elected, I think that's best.
Just to read that question, looking ahead of the 2024 European elections, do you have practical advice on how to outreach with new MEPs? This would also apply to new MPs. So how do you do that? Parliaments change, you stay where you are. You're dealing with new...
We are in the middle of it.
Oh, and of course, yes.
Yes. Trying to survive. No, just coming back one sec to the previous question, to engage young researchers. And I would say that, in fact, we have to face the reality. We need to be a different scientist in the next century. Even if you are not professionalized and at the interface, like I am, for example, or my colleagues, but even if you stay in the lab, you need to be trained, and you need to learn how to give scientific advice at what point of your career. You need to understand the trade-offs. You need to understand how it works, how public policy works. You need to be influential somehow. And this is something that young scientists are really, keen of it. I mean, we can see young people wanted to know more about this, about science diplomacy, they want to really have an influence.
But is that their job? I mean, surely,
I mean, I think
you're a scientist or researcher. You're not a policymaker, are you?
But you must be, if you're a scientist, you must be influential somehow. So you need to know the instruments. You need to know how it works. Maybe you want to devote few months of your life because you have a crisis and you want to be there, and then you come back to the lab. But at least you need to know that possibility is there, not to live in your lab forever.
Okay, Racha, what about you? And then Chris, and then I want to...
Actually, I want to react to what Anna says, because I think researchers are very keen on engaging with the policymakers. That's not the problem. The problem is to get policymakers to be interested in what research is producing. And the other side of this question is also the fact that researchers are precarious. They have to publish or perish, and often it's very difficult to fit producing policy briefs within the short time frame they have during their postdoc, and so it's also something to keep in mind that as research departments in parliaments or even working with the executive, we need also to support researchers and create also bridges with research institute to encourage such cooperation with the researchers, so that the research they would do for policymakers would be also valued as the research valued in in universities, labs, whatever.
In their environments,
Yeah.
okay. Chris, you want to make a comment on that?
Yeah, I'd love to disagree with panelists. So just to mischaracterize some of the things you've said so that I can rebut them. I agree, yes, it is difficult to get science into policy because policymakers don't always want to hear it. But policymakers and politicians will only do science better once scientists learn how to do policy and politics better. That is the order of things, unfortunately. So we have to make that adjustment. So that would sort of lead to Anna's point about, well, they need to be trained. But having run the Centre for Science and Policy at the University of Cambridge, and I mean, maybe Cambridge is an extreme version of this, but roughly a third of the people we worked with were fine, didn't need any training. Throw them in front of a policymaker, they'd be golden. About another third really benefited from training and they became much better. And then there was a good another third who you never wanted near a policymaker, no matter how much you trained them, just stay in the damn lab. So now couple that with one of the few sort of really valuable practical findings that have come out of the STS research, which is, sorry, looking at Alessandro as an STS scholar, so I like to rib him about how useless the vast majority of the findings are, is a huge emphasis on intermediaries and how important intermediaries are. And Spain, I think, is the calling card for how important it is to do science advice properly, not just by getting scientists to engage, but getting scientists to lobby for intermediaries. They didn't settle and say, oh, just listen to us, listen to us, listen to us. The scientists got together and said, we need an office in Parliament that provides science advice. We need intermediaries to build a bridge between us in the academic community and you in politics. And the same is true. You don't just need those in parliaments and in executives. You also need them in universities. A pitifully small number of universities have bodies that are designed to build bridges between the research community in that university and the various policy and industry audiences and societal audiences out there. And that's something that's been growing a lot in the UK. There's plenty of really good examples to point at there. I've got a PhD student working on it in Germany, where it's not a great scene. So huge opportunities and focus on intermediaries, I think, would be really valuable.
And just before we go out to the audience here, Chris, those intermediaries, are you talking about individuals? Are you talking about individuals who are good communicators, who have scientific backgrounds or political backgrounds, or what kind of people, or organisations you're talking about?
Yeah, it's being bilingual in science and policy is sort of really what I'm getting at, which obviously requires different skills in different domains and so on, but that's really the crux of it.
Who can speak both languages.
Exactly.
Okay, we've loads of questions coming in through Slido, but would anybody in the room? Yes, we have person back here. Yes, if you can stand up, thank you. I'm going to stand up for this so that I can see everybody. Yeah, we'll take your question first. I saw a hand up over here, did I? One there, and I think, and lady back there. So we'll take your question first. Thank you.
Well, thank you. My name is Annegret Keizer. I work for the Netherlands Scientific Council for Government Policy, and we are an intermediary organization. And we have the specific task to advise for the cabinet as a whole, and by defect also for Parliament. But the problem is that our reports are relevant for more than one ministry, and also for more than one committee within Parliament. But if we send our reports to Parliament, then the Dutch equivalent of your organizations needs to cut it up in slices again to bring it to parliamentarians, because they also think in silos, because they have one issue that they are responsible for. So do you have the same problem, that it's difficult to get the more broader issues on the table, and how do you support your parliamentarians in doing that?
Okay, so can you keep that question in mind? And I think we had a question gentleman over here. And then I'll take the two questions and then I'll reach out to you. Yeah.
Yeah, just a small question. What is particular about parliamentary science
advice? Can you stand up? Sorry for the cameras. Yeah,
or legislative science advice in comparison to science advice in general? Because we've been already involved in research about research questions regarding legislative science advice, and we had difficulties to pinpoint the difference between that and in general. We can think of a couple of things, but what is your experience in that? Okay,
so I think I saw Chris, you could maybe answer the second one. The first question then, who wants to start off? Racha, do you want to start off with the first one about segmenting?
I would say that in this kind of case, we would present the output of our research to different parliamentary committees at the same time. Or when we are faced with a general question that has different sides that can be tackled in one research output, I think we'd organize a conference and invite MPs and also the research community. We actually try to do that every year. We have a yearly event that we organize where we try to tackle one very vast issue on which we invite all the stakeholders to participate and yeah.
Okay, Anna and Marcus. Anna, you first. Do you want to contribute to that?
No, I would say something very similar. I think you sometimes can use the report to several stakeholders, and you should, in fact. Maybe they will come back with different feedbacks, but then you should be as broad as possible, because one of the main impacts that we would have is to create debate, as Chris was saying before. And this is very important, not just within the parliament, but also in society. So if we can join forces to create that debate together with the executive power, society, parliament, that would be great for us. Because then something that you want to be talked and to be, an issue within the parliament, you join forces with other stakeholders. So that's perfect with us.
Okay, Marcus?
Well, I would actually very much hope that our work is multidisciplinary and would be across silos, because otherwise we miss the point. And also in the nature of STOA, as I said, there are members from different committees. And so we would rarely focus on one committee individually, which again, I think that would miss the point. And no, we would not cut a study into pieces to send it to different committees. I think, again, the nature of our committee structure, panel structure, is that so we will present it to the members of the panel, and then the different members are invited or encouraged to take that back to their committee work. And so, I mean, it's in in the statutes of STOA to be multidisciplinary and to go across silos. Not saying that European Parliament doesn't have a silo structure, of course.
Chris, you wanted to comment on the second question.
I think I can add some interest there, but just on the first point, I'm happy to discuss that afterwards, and you can go and beat Franz around the head with whatever ideas we come up with. Where was the gentleman?
Over there, yes.
Yeah. Oh, hey, you've moved. Yeah. So I think it's a distinction that only kind of matters to geeks in this room. The Venn diagram of science advice for Parliament and Executive overlaps heavily. So, I mean, but just to park that, where the differences exist, the main one is to do with, underpinned by the fact that in executives, you're working with a much narrower range of policy options. And in Parliament, you're working with everything you can think of. So, for example, I don't know if you're doing, energy policy within in a framework where it's a privatized industry, and you're working for, say, the Conservative government in the UK, you're working in that framework. That is an option. But like if the left wing got in, suddenly you'd be dealing with an issue of nationalisation and so on. So in Parliament, that's live. That's still a live issue, the nationalisation issue. In government, it isn't. And that just means that the nature of the advice you're giving is different. And the way that it primarily manifests as different is that if you kind of think about the Roger Pilkey framework of honest broker of policy alternatives, you can do a very detailed assessment within government behind closed doors where you say, look, here's policy option 1B, like A, B, C, D, E. Here's how the evidence lines up against each of those. The evidence is more for this and so on. A chief scientist can get in a room with a minister and actually say, look, you should be doing this, not that. That's a really terrible idea. You can't do that at all in Parliament, really. It's just such a headache. There's too many stakeholders. They disagree so wildly on the underlying values and so on. So you're working with a much broader range of kind of like, well, here's what the evidence says, and then you kind of hand it over, or you frame yourself as a committee and deal with it that way. So, yeah, it's a messy distinction, not least, but I mean, there is a distinction, but also there's a distinction between parliaments as well, huge difference. So, again, I'd love to geek out with you afterwards if you want to discuss it further.
Okay, we'll take a question from the lady at the back. Then I want to go back to the Slido questions because we've got some very good ones there as well.
Thank you. My question is about the role of this intermediation that we are discussing. We discussed about this also in a panel this morning. I can witness how it is important to have this role. I work in the National Department of Civil Protection in Italy. And we, in the department, that's a governmental structure because we are part of the Prime Minister's office. Many of us has a strong scientific background, but we are governmental officers, so we deeply know the public administration and how it works. In many cases, I see also among these people that this kind of a hybrid experts, this kind of people in between the two sides are embedded in public administrations. For the parliament, for the, I work for the government. I would like to ask if, do you consider the possibility that also on the scientific side, there could be people with strong scientific, also human science, of course, not only science in sense of STEM, but do you think that there is interest in the academia to have people who can do this role of bridge of the hybrid expert?
The hybrid expert, yeah.
Yeah, because I see many of these people on the side of the public administration and not from the academia.
Okay, who wants to, Anna, do you want to take that question?
My feeling would be exactly the contrary. Well, I feel that the scientific community, the researchers are very much interested in these issues and they really want to be influential. But as I was saying, we have to distinguish. We have the professional career that maybe we are doing, and then you have also the other pathway where you stay in your lab, but you want to be able to jump in at a certain moment. I would say that you don't have a very clear path. In our case, the office in Spain came from first contacts with the diplomats. We came from science diplomacy. And from there, we realized that the interface between science and public policy could be made also in other institutions. My main advice would be to make institutions stronger. And as I said at the beginning, more sophisticated with these mechanisms. It should come from the institution. You should have these thinking and interface units within the institution and give opportunities to researchers or policymakers to develop that part of the career if they want. But it's the institution who should really be there to foster the ecosystem. So this is the way I think should be fostered.
Okay, let's go back to some Slido questions. Tina has posed a question which is getting a lot of thumbs up. Do you apply a standard methodology when producing science input for parliamentary policy making? Very good question. Racha, maybe you could answer that for us, please.
So when the research department was created in the Luxembourg Parliament, we drafted our own lines of conduct, actually. Because we abide to the civil servant status, I would say. So we need to be neutral. We abide to the same principles as our colleagues. But we also need to abide to other principles that are specific to scientists. Why? Because our credibility is at stake as researchers as well when we write these research briefs for policymakers. So within these guidelines, we have specified our methodology and our ethic of work. So impartiality, of course, objectivity, yeah.
Yeah, it's a code of conduct, really.
Yeah. And we actually took inspiration from all the principles that we applied to ourselves when we were all still working in research.
Okay, I just want to get Marcus's views. I'll go back to you, Chris. No, yeah, Chris.
Yeah, sure. I just wanted to say it varies enormously. So some parliamentary research bodies have a set methodology that they apply on every single piece of work that they do. Others flex their approach from study to study. But if you're interested, the language of science advice, which is a term most commonly used in executives, in parliaments, it's more often you'll hear technology assessment. If you search tech assessment methodologies, there's a massive literature out there that you can just pick and choose from, and lots of institutions, like the US government, for example, GAO, Government Accountability Office, they have this massive swathe of methods, and then for each study, they go through a tick box, and they're like, we'll have that one, and then they pull their project together. So it varies from body to body.
Okay, thank you for that. There's an interesting question. How are parliamentarians, now it's not the scientists, how are parliamentarians trained to communicate better and listen more?
They're not.
Well, it's the electorate who takes the decision.
How do you train them? How do you train them? Okay, how do you train politicians to communicate better?
May I say something? I think that there's a lot of prejudice also about parliamentarians. I think that they have a lot of expertise, and we should also listen to them. And in fact, for me, we should also create that knowledge together. Sometimes the questions, sometimes someone says that this morning, and this is completely true. We should really co-create those questions in order to be relevant for all of us. So again, for me, this is this collective intelligence, and we need them on board. So they should be part of the equation. We cannot think that we are just transferring unilaterally the knowledge to them. This is not like that. This is not working like that. And sometimes when you bring experts to the Congress, they're really amazed about the knowledge that they are facing, you know, and sometimes MPs knows more than them on certain topics. So do not underestimate the knowledge, and really try to work with them instead of, you know, having this prejudice. This is a very important point, I think.
Okay, are Spanish MPs entirely different to MEPs, including Spanish MEPs? Or do you agree with Anna on this from a European Parliament's perspective?
No, I mean, I would partially agree with Anna on that one. I mean, it's just politicians are necessarily trained to communicate. I mean, they are full-time politicians, so they have been elected and they've gone through election campaigns, and I have huge respect for the political work that they're doing. And usually communication is the strong part. The listening part maybe less
so.
because that's less demanded in the, I don't know, I mean, it really depends, but I mean, usually it's training on the job. The communication part is usually not the weakest part. But I mean, I agree with the members we are working with. They are open, they're interested in the topic, but then that's also a bit of a luxury because the members we're working with in STOA, I mean, we're preaching, how do you say, preaching to the choir, preaching to the converted.
Yeah.
We have 27 members out of 705, but these are interested in science and technology topics. That's why they're there.
I'm curious from a media point of view because for years I was editor of Europarl Radio, which reported on news from the European Parliament, primarily the plenary sessions in Strasbourg for Irish radio stations. And that's very much about distilling down very complex, sometimes unnecessarily complicated legislative stories and things that would come out of the Parliament into a script that would work for a local radio station and audiences. And it's always a challenge. But I would go occasionally, as all journalists do, to these committees in the European Parliament to get access to those very reports that you might be doing. I'm just curious to know, does the information you give, very valuable information to the parliamentarians, is that open to all the journalists and the media? And are they aware, like, do the media know that there is this valuable information out there?
Actually, I thought of it after the question on segmentation. One of our principles as an administration is transparency. So whatever we produce, we try to make it public and publish it on the internet site of the Chambre des Députés. And sometimes we have way more reaction from media than from the MEPs, on what the research we produce. However, because of our own principles as researchers, we leave our public relations the task of dealing with media. We never deal directly with the media.
Yes, yeah, you're not able to.
I was going to say that we do exactly the same. We are completely transparent, and we have that information in the website of the Congress of Deputies, which is super nice to have scientific information in the Congress of Deputies, if you think about it. And we just send the reports 2 hours before to the MPs, and then we put it on the website. So it's the only thing they have, 2 hours.
Yeah. Marcus, did you want to comment on that?
Yes, indeed. Well, all our information is public and the studies are available on the website. In addition, part of STOA's activity, there's something which is called European Science Media Hub, which is specifically targeted at providing science information for journalists. And once a year, we run a European summer school in Strasbourg for young journalists on scientific topics, which is a couple of days, and we have a huge uptake on that one. And it's a regular event we are doing, and so the mission of the Science Media Hub is also to promote scientific evidence to a media audience. So, yeah.
Because you can certainly see from, and I saw it over the years, the well-informed MEPs are great sources of information, you know, when they keep themselves up to date. And you're absolutely right, very often it's their assistants, it's the PAs are the ones who are really doing the digging down.
Karen, if I may say something, this is a big difference also with the science advice for the executive. Probably a lot of information that you're given in the executive power is not transparent. It's just coming into the system, but you're not obliged to post that anywhere. Since we really need to be super transparent and independent and show what we are doing and who we are interviewing, for instance. All the names are there, and you need to have this exposure to the public, while in the executive power you may or may not show what you are saying.
Very interesting. I want to go to, Adam Eisgrow, is it? I represent the Europe Tech Policy Committee of an international NGO, ACM. How can our collective intelligence best be of service to each of the parliaments on the panel? Marcus? No? Racha? Do you want to answer that one? I am the Europe Tech Policy Committee. I represent, the Europe Tech Policy Committee of an international NGO. I suppose, how can this person's information be of service?
We usually don't deal directly with NGOs or associations or any corporations, whatever. We try to work directly with the MPs and with the administration, and the only source we reach out to is researchers. However, that said, whenever we hold our annual conferences, as I said, we try to give voice to all stakeholders, and on this occasion, we invite on panels different interest groups, but always trying to give voice to everyone equally.
Okay, very good. Yes.
Yeah, just a clarification. Hearing that question, that person worked for the Association of Computer Machinery, which is the largest, association of computer professionals. So it's not an NGO per se. It's like an academy whatsoever. I serve into that, and in the past we have been collaborating with SIM. So we are basically the computer science community, and of course we traditionally interact, around the world with the various government, parliamentary, etc. So it's a resource that is available for the European Commission, the governing board, the various governor around the world, etc. So it's not really an NGO, it's just a professional association like, the Royal Academy or whatever. Thank you.
Okay, thank you for the clarification. We'll just go to Elena's question. Does anybody else in the room have a question right now? Because I want to go back to Chris about AI, because he wrote a report on this very recently. Elena, though, has a question through Slido. A lot of topics require a combined research/industry perspective. How should scientists interact with industry to provide advice to policy, or should they at all? Anna? Yeah?
We do. I mean, we interact with every single scientist, whatever he is. He could be in an NGO, he could be in the industry sector. We recover evidence and scientific evidence. Of course, we look for the quality of that evidence. Not everything is valuable, but if someone is doing a very important job within the industry, we will talk to him or to her. So we don't differentiate.
Okay, just on that point, maybe to you, Marcus. I mean, what if, let's say there's a piece of legislation coming down the tracks about mobile phones, and Commission is maybe looking at restricting mobile phones because maybe they're bad. This thing has come up over the years, and maybe the Technology Committee or whatever in the European Parliament wants to find out more. How do you balance that challenge of reaching out to industry to get their side of the story from a scientific perspective, while also making sure you filter what they're saying to you so you know you're giving the most objective information to the parliamentarians?
Indeed, that is a tricky question, and it's difficult to get the balance right. There's also often the question that researchers, they often work with industry or for industry. We had members attacking a researcher because he had some industry funding, and then questioning whether he was neutral and more biased and so on. So that is a pertinent question. I think it's important to reach out to both sides. So typically, if we had an industry perspective, we would also hear the other side and ask her, is there an NGO or an environmental organization view on it? And obviously, we would ask the researcher to demonstrate in the study the different views. Not necessarily coming, as I said, we would rarely come up with recommendations. It would be policy options and say, okay, this is the broad range of views on the topic. Industry has these and these views. There's the views of environmental NGOs and so on, and then present the landscape of opinions without necessarily giving a recommendation.
Racha, would it be the same from your point of view when you interact with industry?
Actually, we don't.
Oh, you don't interact?
No, we don't at all. As I replied to the previous question, we don't. And perhaps we do in a direct way when, for instance, we engage with a researcher who's doing research for university and the industry at the same time, but we avoid engaging directly with the industry, especially that the industry has a way of influencing, like official procedures to influence the legislative process. So they don't need to, and we don't need to reach out to industry for our scientific research.
Did you want to comment? Yes.
I should clarify indeed that as part of the studies which are done by researchers, we would ask them to reach out to both sides and we would not ourselves reach out. It would be via the researcher who conducts the study for us.
Okay, okay, great.
So
Yeah.
reaching out to industry and NGOs as a distinct section from the science community is critically important to doing science advice in Parliament well, in my view, because there are experts in those domains, and yes, they may come attached with a political position or a set of values or some kind of corporate agenda that they may have. But in terms of bringing together relevant evidence, they can be very useful. In terms of representing a specific position that is important in society, they can be extremely important. So, for example, Anna was talking about the kind of peer review process that they have for publications. You could go out to about 30-odd people. I bet that a big bunch of those people would be based in NGOs, industry, and so on, and that's a really important part of the feedback that you get.
I want to put, we've only a few minutes left, but Chris, you just published a piece in Nature on the use of AI in scientific advice. I was reading it, very interesting. This is a very controversial issue, isn't it? To what extent should AI, whether it's ChatGPT or whatever it is, be used to produce a report or something or other that might then, in this context, feed into a report for parliamentarians? What is your view on that?
Yeah, I think you framed it right. It's how much should it? At the moment, the debate is whether it will. I should just say that the piece you're referring to in Nature, co-authored with Alessandro, who's sitting down here, and David Budd-Pedersen, who's also at the conference. I don't think he's in this session. So it was a collaborative effort. It will be built in at some point, and I think there are 4 key areas where it can be, it will eventually be of use. The question is, how do you do it? One is evidence synthesis, so reaching out into the academic literature across languages, which is at the moment something we don't do very well, and collating that evidence, shortcutting that through AI tools is something that is being researched right now, and there were some pretty good sort of prototypes on that. Generative AI, you know, ChatGPT et al., this is the kind of the talk of the town. In terms of speeding up some aspects of policy brief writing, that's a no-brainer. I know some people who are already doing it. Either things like quick technical summaries or summaries of a broader document they've already written, or generating ideas about points that are relevant or what the various policy options are. It's actually pretty good at some of those things already. Yes, it needs editing. Yes, it would be better if it wasn't a black box. And sure, we can do there's some really important work to be done on building new LLMs that are much more rigorous than the existing models. For example, GAO is putting all of its back literature into an LLM at the moment, with a view that US Congress will be able to use generative AI to interrogate the back catalogue of GAO publications. Game-changing in terms of ability to get into the political debate. The third area is horizon scanning. At the moment, it's a little bit sort of finger in the air. I would say actually STOA is probably the best example out there of a parliamentary body that does horizon scanning.
What's horizon scanning?
Identifying both political and emerging technology issues that will become important on a particular timeline. Okay. STOA is pretty rigorous about the way they do it. Most aren't, by virtue of just not having the capacity to do it. Also, it's really, really difficult to do. GAO, again, does some quite good stuff on the political things. STOA does a really impressive job on the emerging technology things. But trend analysis by AI tools, looking at what the conversation happening across the internet and academic literature is relatively easy to do. We just don't do it much yet. There are, again, proto tools out there, but I think that will be integrated. And then the final thing, everyone's bugbear when it comes to science advice is impact assessment. We have no idea what works and what doesn't. We are basically playing with bums on seats proxies. We count the number of people who show up to events, and we hope that we get an idea about how many people are reading publications, and that's it. I've got a PhD student at the moment working on tools that will pick up the use of phrases that have been pulled out of policy briefs so that we can detect where the information is getting into political debate and scrutiny. So those kind of tools will be absolutely invaluable to us in the future so that we can improve and become much more scientific about the way we do science advice.
Yeah, Marcus, you didn't want to comment on that. Really interesting, very interesting. Anybody else? Final comments before we close the show? I think we've gone through a really... Oh, do we have one last person? Oh, yes. Sorry, you had your hand up. We'll just take your final...
Yes.
Yeah.
Thanks, Edvards Koks from the Latvian Ministry of Education and Science. So a lot of this panel has discussed the tension between stability of advice on the one hand and the ability to adapt to some challenges or perhaps new inputs on the other hand. And the question is perhaps a bit more pertinent to smaller countries, but how do you manage the tension between having the sort of usual suspects who are on the one hand reliably good at explaining their science to policymakers and have a good, let's say, working relationship with people in policy-making processes, while also not having them be entrenched and having this opportunity to change the people in the advisory networks? That's, I think, another part of this tension. Thank you.
Maybe, yeah, well, Anna, and I'm thinking Racha because of the smaller states.
Yes, I was going to say that in our case, our reports will be having a completely different bunch of experts each time. So we don't have the usual suspects. They are completely different each time, and we bring those people to the parliament. And they can be Spanish, but they can be also international. So we try to be very open to that, and it makes things more interesting, I think.
Okay, Racha?
Actually, we have the exact same position. We never reach out to the same researchers, and we reach out locally and internationally, so the problem is solved this way.
Yeah. And Chris, yeah?
Yeah, there are two quick things that you can do. One, we did it in the UK Parliament. We set up a knowledge exchange unit, which sole job is to get out into the academic world, make connections, build skills and appetite for engaging with Parliament. And they act as an interface. So when there's a Parliament, a question that it needs to be answered in Parliament, they've got a database they can reach out. They spend a huge amount of time building that network and keeping the database up to date. It doesn't happen by itself. It needs time and effort and resource. The second thing is be part of the international networks. As small countries, you can't do everything yourself. One of the best pieces of science advice I think I've ever seen from Mark Ferguson back when he was chief scientist in Ireland was he banned everybody from producing reports for Ireland. He was like, sod that. Lots of other countries are producing reports. Most of the time, it's relevant to what we're doing in Ireland. And if there is a special case and we need something specific to Ireland, then we'll talk about doing a report. But stop just doing it yourself. Work as networks. In the parliamentary setting, we all are connected to EPTA, the European Parliamentary Technology Assessment Network. There's, for the wider network, INCSA, International Network for Government Science Advice, and there's a bunch of others that are really important. And as small country networks, there's actually a small country network, developed small country network that was set up by Peter Gluckman, right? I'm looking at Lorenzo, you know about this. Anyway, there's lots of networks out there, get stuck in.
Okay, on that point we'll leave it. But Chris, Racha, Anna and Marcus, thank you so much. Ladies and gentlemen, perhaps you could show your appreciation for our guests.